Greetings and welcome to another edition of the Pedalshift Project. The Pedalshift Project is a series of conversations, thoughts, and experiments around the bike touring lifestyle. From tips and tricks to ideas on how to ride your ride. Let's shrink the world by bike. Show notes and more are at pedalshift.net/093, and you can email the show, pedalshift@pedalshift.net. Call the voicemail hotline at 202-930-1109, and you can check Pedalshift out also on all the socials as well. Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 93 of the pod. This is Tim Mooney again, back at it for another roll at this, and I'm excited to be bringing you the 93rd edition of the Pedalshift Project. Hey, just to open up the show, going to be rolling through a few announcements that I've been kind of putting out there for the last few episodes. I'm doing the Pacific Coast again. That'll be starting up very soon, early October. I'll be riding from Newport, Oregon to San Francisco. And the next podcast, episode 94, will be giving you many, many more thoughts on what I'll be doing to document things, how this go-around's going to be, all of that. So that's next week as I record this Pedalshift Project number 094. During my ride, there's going to be a little mini hiatus from podcasting, but do not fret, do not worry. I'll be back on Thursday, October 19th from San Francisco, California, with a report on everything that went down, and that will be in Pedalshift 095. So 2 weeks on this week, next week, then 3 weeks off. And I know that's deviating from the schedule that I've been doing since pretty much the last, almost couple of years. It's been pretty much consistent every other week, or three weeks on, 1 week off. This is, of course, as I've talked about before, all a prelude to the march to episode number 100 of the Pedalshift Project. And as I've talked about, we've got something pretty special lined up for episode number 100. We've got friends of the show as special guests. I've even got lined up another person who I'm hoping to get on as well as a special guest star, a guest speaker, guest host, as it were, for Pedalshift 100. We'll chat about the usual nonsense around bikes. But of course, there's something more than that. We're going to be doing a joint meetup/holiday spectacular that's going to be live and in person, Portland, Oregon, Friday, December 1st at the Beermongers. Details to be announced. That'll be at the Beermongers. I think you might know the address. Southeast Division and 12th in Portland, Oregon. Details to be announced in the interview, and of course a little bit more down the line as well. So just if you're in Portland, you're Portland adjacent or Portland curious, I think, as Brock said at some point in some place, that's December 1st, Friday, December 1st. Quick little announcement as well, previewing the fall and the winter for the show. So, of course, all of this has been a prelude towards episode 100, but I've got a lot of stuff that's going to be coming in between then and now, and then, of course, afterwards. The winter is always kind of a tough time for the show in terms of content usually, but for once in the run of this entire pod, I don't worry about content anymore because I've got so many good, interesting people that are lined up for potential interviews. If you're listening and you're going, hey, why hasn't Tim been in touch? Because he said after Labor Day. It's because I'm kind of going a little crazy with all the details of other things, but I will be in touch. Following the Pacific Coast tour, we've got some great interviews, great stories from people that are writing in. Thanks to everyone for your patience as I get my act together and coordinate all of this. We've got more to come. Looking forward to the rest of 2017 and then in early 2018 as well for the show. But in this episode, we are going to be having one of the great interviews of the show with a friend of the show, Brock Dittus. Brock Dittus is on the Pedalshift Project. Picture that in all caps. That's incredibly funny if you follow Brock's social media announcements of where he's at, because he does it in all caps. When you ever have to describe the joke, it's generally not funny. Anyways, Brock is the co-founder and co-host of the Sprocket podcast, and he is a longtime friend of this particular pod. On this episode, we chat about his multimodal bike camping adventure from Portland to the top of Silver Star Mountain, and that's complete with mass transit fast forwards, biking and hiking, and there's some great ideas on this trip. We also talk about campsite etiquette. We talk about all sorts of different things. The one thing that we don't talk about is an announcement that he just recently made about taking a hiatus from the Sprocket podcast. And I just wanted to take a second to mention that. I think that doing a podcast, news alert, news flash, it can be hard and it can take a lot of your time, and it's got to be piece of what you're passionate about. Otherwise, it's really hard to keep getting up every week and doing it like Brock has done for so long. And the one thing that's really great about the Sprocket podcast, it's sort of the West Coast cousin to this particular pod that you're listening to, is that it's built itself up into such an identity of its own that I think that both Aaron and Guthrie are going to be taking the show into great directions. And it also sounds like that Brock is going to be sort of dribbling in and out over the course of the next year. And it does sound like that this is a hiatus, not a permanent vacation, as it were, from the show. But I think that although we don't touch on it at all in this interview, I just wanted to throw a shout out to Brock for all the years of good listening on the Sprocket podcast. And again, if you do not listen to the Sprocket podcast and yet you listen to this one, I think you might like that one. So go check them out at thesprocketpodcast.com. And Brock will be a co-host for the next few episodes, I think, based on what I understand. And then I actually am going to be out in the land of sunshine and bunnies, Portland, Oregon, at the beginning of October, because of the aforementioned bike tour that I'm going to be doing. So I'll be on a future edition of the Sprocket podcast. Now, what is unclear to me is whether or not Brock will actually be his last episode as before his hiatus, or it will be the first one where he is not. So we shall see how that all goes. I'm going to be there at the beginning of October. So We'll learn more. I'll be in their cool little trailer there, and we'll record a show. It'll be a lot of fun. So anyways, without further ado, Brock Dittus on his awesome adventure. Well, maybe we'll just jump right into it then. I got Brock Dittus here from the Sprocket Podcast. Hello, and thanks for joining us, sir.
Thank you for talking to me on rearranged notice.
Rearranged notice. That's sort of like the sausage of podcasting. We don't even need to necessarily mention these things because all podcasts that we produce are perfect in how they are produced. So it's sausage making. So you have been recently on kind of an adventure kick. I feel like I'm just following you on the socials, on Facebook and on Twitter. You have found your way out to places where you say, I am in X place in all caps, which is your want. But I hear that you did a really awesome bike tour recently and a kind of crazy overnight adventure. I'd love to hear more about it.
Absolutely. Yeah, you had actually put the call out to hear more short adventures because like you talk about long distance bicycle touring, obviously, but also the sub 24 hour, is it S240, which I think it maybe is sub 24 hours out or something like that. But the short trips are also good. So yeah, had a good one and I wanted to share it with you. So I went to, they call it Silver Star Mountain out here. It's just north and east of town. So kind of up, you can see it from a lot of places in Portland. It's the highest peak in kind of the local mountainous areas.
That is in the Cascade Mountain Range, is it not, for folks who are not Oregon centric?
Yes, it's in the general area. We've got a lot of mountains out here, so I don't know if it's the primary Cascade Range, but it's the closest like actual mountains you can get to.
Gotcha.
So I used to go there with friends of mine back in the day. Used to be we would drive up there, and multiple times we would go out and go up the mountain at about 6 or 7 o'clock at night or later. Do a like kind of an evening or night hike, and then camp out on top of this mountain. And it was absolutely beautiful. Again, it's the highest peak in close driving range. And so you can get out there, see amazing, beautiful views, watch a beautiful sunset, camp out overnight, and then get up in the morning and watch the sunrise. Like I said, I used to drive to this all the time, and I really wanted to find out if I could do it by bike. I don't own a car any longer, and I still like going out and having adventures, but oftentimes the adventures I want to have mean that I need like a weekend or more of the time just to go out and do something over the course of a week or to drive there and have someone drop me off. I really wanted to see if I could do it just kind of self-contained with minimal help. And so came up with this idea of bus packing, the idea that you can load your bike onto a bus, bring the stuff you need for your adventure, and use that as what you like to refer to as a fast forward, the idea that you can get somewhere quicker and start your adventure sooner with a little bit of help from an existing system. So that's what I did. The C-Trans service is what operates on the north side of the Columbia River in Washington State. Portland is famous for TriMet. It's an award-winning transit system, but Clark County also has its own transit system in Washington. It's a similar fare, and I want to say that the fares are transferable. If you buy an adult fare or an all-day fare on either system, you can take it to the other one. I haven't verified that, but I'm pretty sure it's true.
That sounds familiar to me.
Yeah, I would get on at Park Rose Transit Center is in North Portland, near the airport, northeast Portland. And it's a bus line that goes across the river and kind of gets you away from the city more rapidly. So it drops you off in a suburban transit center. It's one of the more beautiful transit centers. And that connects to a couple more lines that get you up to Battleground, Washington, which is about 20 miles from Portland.
What was the experience with C-Tran? Because, I mean, you were saying, TriMet is this award-winning transit system, and then there's C-Tran. So I was just curious, how is C-Tran these days? Because back in the day when I was, back in the what is that, the joy of the 90s or whatever Portlandia calls it, when I lived there, C-Tran was, I don't want to say humorously different, but it was not the same.
Yeah, no, C-Tran has actually made a lot of advances, and they've done a lot of modernization to their fleet. I would say more of their buses than less of their buses are actually hybrid. So they are hybrid electric, where they have a motor and they have batteries. So they look funny. They've got the batteries mounted on the top of the bus, and that allows them to be very efficient and keep the air clean. And they also have a policy specifically interesting to bicycle tourists and travelers, is that their policy allows for, if the bike rack on the front of the bus is full, you can bring your bike inside the bus. And it depends on the system you're in. Some transit systems are generous in that way. I know that TriMet is not. In Portland, if you can't get your bike on the bike rack, if it's already full, then you're out of luck and you have to wait for the next bus. But C-Tran will let you bring your vehicle inside as long as there's room for anybody else who has needs on that particular bus at that time.
That's great. That's unusual in transit systems in my experience, because normally I'm told you can't do something, and that sounds like it's a lot more permissive. So that's great. So you get to Battleground and you've got your bike. The bus pulls away. You are literally stranded, but you have a bike and you have your camping gear. What happened next?
That's right. Yeah. So I was along with my friend Aaron Delaney, who anybody listening to the Sprocket podcast would be familiar with. He's a friend of ours, really into bicycle adventures and travel as well. And so he went along with me on this. And actually, he showed up. I think I wasn't sure. I had invited him, but I didn't know he was coming until about 10 minutes before the bus showed up for my adventure. So he arrived at the last minute to go along with me on the adventure. We were up in Battleground, and I had scoped out this ride previously. Silver Star Mountain is accessible by some forest roads. They are not the best roads, and I don't even have the best bike for them. But I had gone out just to see if it was possible to get the bike up there. When I tested the route out, I did it in exactly the wrong direction. I started with an enormously steep climb on a narrow road with tons of traffic. And then I ended up with more climbing at the very end of the route. So it turned out the best way to do this trip is to go up to Battleground first, start from north to south. So Battleground, it's turning into a suburban town, but it's very close to farmland. So we went out of town, kind of north, and then turned east. And the Lewis River, one of the forks of the Lewis River, is out there. And on my reconnaissance ride, I discovered this beautiful path that is paved for maybe a mile or something, but also extends into the forest as an unpaved, I think it used to be a road. Now it's exclusively for walkers, bicyclists, and anybody else under their own travel pogo sticks, I suppose. So that goes out to Moulton Falls County Park, which is a popular swimming and cliff jumping destination. Great place for lunch. And then after that, we in earnest jumped into the forest. And this is Washington's state forest. It's Department of Natural Resources for the state of Washington. They manage some of this land just outside of the national forest boundary where Silver Star Mountain is located. So we went up into the hills, fair amount of climbing, fair amount of uphill, downhill. The tricky part of this ride is that you gain altitude and then you lose altitude, and then you have to gain it back again. So there's a lot of going up and down. It's a bit trying, but Delaney hadn't been out on very many adventures this spring or summer, and he was still able to do it. So don't let that discourage you if you want to try this out yourself sometime.
It's not like those Bataan death marches that you normally do in Colorado in 104 degrees.
That's right. That's my style.
Okay, so it's 2 notches below that.
That's right. Yep. So the Dole Valley Road is the name of the road that kind of goes out towards the forest area, and it eventually turns into gravel. And it's not washy, cobbly gravel. It's actually it's a bumpy road, but all the rocks are firmly embedded into the ground. So that allows you to kind of bump around without worrying about kind of sliding out in a wash of gravel somewhere. There are varying levels of comfort, I guess, as you go. And uphill is not as bad as downhill. Whenever you're rolling downhill in this gravel, you have to worry about the vibrations in your arms, you have to worry about your speed, because if you go too fast, you run the risk of losing control of your bike. So I was traveling with 2 panniers on the back. I know there are many different ways you could do this. I don't have a cool bike packing setup, but I do have the gear that I own, and I wanted to see if it would work. So it performed serviceably. And we got a plane going over here.
Of course. Well, it's flavor. We'd like to. It's flavor. What are you riding these days, bike wise? Just kind of typical as we wait for the plane to go by. It is a lovely sounding plane.
No, my bicycle is a Jamis Aurora. It's a Coda, but I've turned it into an Aurora. So I don't have the geometry of a touring bike, but I've compensated for that with a rack that rides a little bit farther back for the panniers. And everything else has kind of been parts swapped in and out.
And so steel frame. Are you using the disc brakes or the rim brakes on something like that?
I've got rim brakes on 700C wheels, and the tires are 32 centimeters wide.
That is classic kind of touring bike setup. Then that's and so it was handling this sort of pseudo gravel, and including on the downhill, which is always the trickiest. But
right,
is there anything that you would change after this experience? Just the amount of just the vibration, the riding. Did it feel like that the bike could handle that? Because I know a lot of people who get into gravel grinding and forest roads are sort of insisting you must use knobby tires and all this other kind of stuff. But it sounds like it worked all right.
It was all right. I could use probably wider tires and maybe less tire pressure, but that's to be experimented with at a later time. So I think I was on probably the lower limit of what was acceptable for this. Obviously, it could be more comfortable, but I think I got out of the adventure alive and unscathed. So that worked out okay. One of the things to consider with this one is that the trip ends at a trailhead. The bike trip ends at a trailhead. There is not running water at the trailhead, so we had to purify some water. And I used a combination of Life Straw for the immediate water, which is just that little filter straw that you can suck water through directly from the source or from a bottle of unpurified. Also used Aquamira, which makes no claims to actually purifying your water, but that's what everyone uses that I've met. So there is a stream about 1 to 2 miles from the trailhead, and so we filled up with water there, tried to get as much banked up for the hike as we could. And then we locked our bikes up. At the trailhead, there is a sign just beyond the parking lot where you can lock your bikes up out of sight of the road. I wasn't too worried about, people on the hike stealing our bikes, but I was worried about locking it up just in this forest road where anybody could roll by and see something that they could try to steal. So we stashed the bikes kind of back there in the woods, locked them to the sign with a security cable, and then we took our backpacks out of the panniers and walked 4 miles up to the peak of Silver Star Mountain. So it's a beautiful, beautiful place to hike. Absolutely amazing.
That's kind of a nice combo, and it's something that I've never really done, which is to combine a bike tour. Well, I mean, you were truly multimodal here, bus to bike to hike. Did you do anything differently in terms of the gear choice? I mean, it sounds like you would have had a backpack or something like that to get the stuff on your back. Was there any other choices that you made differently because of the hiking component?
Well, I knew that I wouldn't have a ton of space in my panniers, and so what I wanted to do was just kind of get the most minimal setup I could possibly get. And so instead of a backpacking pack like the one I take on my long distance hiking tours, I ended up going with my JanSport, basically, like the back to school backpack, and stuffing as much as I could in there of clothing and my sleeping bag, and I ended up tying my foam pad to sleep on to the side. But basically tried to get like the smallest serviceable pack that I could.
What did you end up doing for a tent? Did you just bring a one-person smaller tent? I mean, you obviously didn't have a ton of carrying capacity. Curious what you did for that. Or did you cowboy camp like a boss?
Yeah, we cowboy camped like bosses. Yeah, we had the whole basically sleeping under the stars. And the conditions were right for that. There wasn't a whole lot of breeze the time that we had went up there. It depends on the day, depends on the weather. But Silver Star being the tallest mountain gets a lot of breeze typically. We've had kind of a wildfire season here in the Northwest, and so there was a lot of standing smoke in the valleys, and the air itself was pretty still. So I had never actually experienced it that quiet up there. Matter of fact, I barely needed the sleeping bag. I think I woke up overheated a couple times overnight. But yeah, we just rolled out our rolls, put down our pads, and slept up there on the peak. There is a concrete slab where an observation tower used to be. And so we just rolled our stuff out there and slept at the very top.
For folks who are listening who are not familiar with the Northwest, you probably think, oh, wow, it rains all the time. But actually, this time of year, it kind of rarely rains. And in recent years, it's usually been, I believe the term would be ass hot, Brock. Would you
yes.
say? It's kind of been crazy.
Absolutely.
You mentioned the wildfires, which of course have been on a lot of people's minds, just who observe and care about the Northwest. Were you able to see any of that from your vantage point, or just the smoke?
So that was the crazy thing, is there was a lot of smoke. There was far less visibility than usual. Usually when I've made the hike in the past, you can go up there and see for miles and see all the mountains and everything. Like, we could still see the biggest peaks, but there was a lot of smoke hanging around. And as the sun went down, it was a kind of a beautiful golden purplish sunset. We turned our attention to the east, and we could actually see the glow of the Eagle Creek fire. I think it had just started that day or the day prior.
Wow.
And so there we were up on top of a mountain watching the gorge burn.
Oh, that's just crazy. I mean, it's so heartbreaking to hear what's been going on in the gorge. And of course, and all throughout the West, there's all sorts of different areas that are burning and on fire right now. And hopefully, many of them I know are getting under control as we record this on the 14th of September. So hopefully that will happen without loss of life or damage or whatever. But I know that's the Northwest, and the rest of the West is very much in my thoughts throughout all this process.
Yeah, it's been a tricky season here, and it kind of felt like the apocalypse when the smoke drifted over the Portland area. We had highly unhealthy air quality levels for a couple of days. It's cleared up since. The fires aren't done, but they are a bit more managed now than they were before. But to see that from the top of the mountain was a pretty incredible experience. Obviously, I would be happier if the fire hadn't started, but to see it from that vantage point, most of us don't get to see. We've seen, like big raging fire pictures in our Facebook feeds or something, but it was a different perspective just to kind of see that from a distance out in nature.
Yeah, like I said, I think maybe this is a larger scale than nature can really super regenerate from very quickly. But I mean, forest fires are a part of the natural cycle. But, a lot of these were man-made. And of course, it takes a while. It could take a generation for some of these areas to come back. So we'll see what ends up happening.
Well, I do know that the Columbia River Gorge is a place where a lot of bicycle tourists have gone for overnighters and that sort of thing. And I don't know if this trip I'm describing is right for everyone. Obviously, the gravel will be a turnoff to some people, and hiking will be a turnoff to more people after that. But there are some really beautiful places to explore. And Southwest Washington has always been kind of an untapped resource for forest adventure. There's a lot of stuff back there.
Yeah, I think I'm really intrigued with doing a multimodal trip like this, and I'm really glad that you shared this piece because I don't ever really talk about integrating hiking in, and I know that a lot of different bicycle touring books and whatnot always talk about, after your day of cycling 70 miles fully loaded, why don't you just go for a 2-mile hike up the sand dunes, Which is not exactly something I tend to do, but like on the trip that I'm contemplating or going to be doing in Oregon and California in a couple of weeks, I'm actually going to try to make some time to do that because I have eschewed the hiking elements of it. So when I'm down in Florence, for instance, I've literally never gone to any of the sand dunes there, even though I've been within a stone's throw of it. So I'm going to just conserve my energy to do that. So thank you for sharing all this. I'm just curious, were there any other kind of crazy lessons from what you've learned from all of this, including, but not limited to the trip back? How did that go? What was your sort of overall takeaway for this?
Well, I will say that we camped out on top of the mountain, and there were a couple other folks that we saw over the period of the night. There was one fellow who was inadvisably having a fire on a different ridge, and he was, maybe there were two of them. I don't know. We heard kind of whoops and hollers from across the vales, and looked over, saw this campfire. We yelled to them, I think, before we realized they were having a fire. I was less excited to talk to them after that, just given the wildfire situation, the tinderbox of the woods. But saw another couple of hikers that came up. They actually put up a tent that, in the morning when we woke up, it looked like an REI ad. They were just out there kind of against nothing. It's a beautiful view. And there were some great places to put up a tent in this spot. One of the things that was tricky was that Aaron and I had gotten into our bags and we were already kind of crashed out. I think I was already asleep. Aaron might not have been fully asleep yet. And this fellow rolled up around midnight And Aaron was awake, I was not. And the guy says, "Hey, you mind sharing the mountain?" And Aaron, of course, you're like, "That's a reasonable." Well, of course, it's the outdoors. But then turns out, dude sits down like 2 feet from my head, like his full pack just kind of collapses to the ground, and I wake up with a start, just kind of like, "Oh, what happened?" And it turns out that he spends the rest of the night sitting like right next to us, and I'm just thinking, dude, it's the woods. Like, you could go 10 feet that direction and have solitude. I didn't sleep as well after that, and I don't think he ever went to sleep. He spent like most of the night kind of zipping and unzipping packs and shuffling around in his, it was very quiet up there. The only noise I could hear was this guy that I didn't really know, just kind of like poking around at things all night. At one point in the night, I was like, "Hey man, are you going to stay up here all night? Could you like maybe move over there?" But he never did. And then in the next morning, I just kind of, I don't know, I was less excited about the experience post a bad night's sleep. Also woke up and the sunrise wasn't quite there because of the wildfire smoke. So, I set an alarm for the actual sunrise so we could watch it come up. But basically the sky just kind of got lighter as time went on. So I still recommend the trip, but I would say if random folks show up with like a Makita drill box and they just like sit down, be very clear about what you would like them to do. It didn't seem like he was necessarily like well tuned to picking up on nonverbal cues.
That's a really interesting, like, outside of the scope of the normal of social norms, I guess I would say, for camping. It's, it's one thing to say, "Hey, let me join you here," or "Can I join you at your campfire?" But to like sort of be in that personal space and then still be awake and moving and all that when everybody is clearly asleep is sort of outside the norms. Is there a trail nearby there? Is it possible that person was on a through hike of some type, or what was the scenario?
It's possible. We identified both of the other car people that we saw when we started the hike. There were 2 cars left over. One was there overnight and might have been the whooping and holler and fire guy, but maybe not. And the other was someone who was leaving as we were arriving. So he might have come from a different trailhead. He might have been out on a multi-day, what have you. But either way, yes, I should have been more clear. I think I was kind of in my like half asleep haze and just really wanting to go back to sleep. So I wasn't nearly as proactive as I would have been if I was fully awake.
I talked about this, I think, on a few pods ago about when I was all camped out in this one campsite on the C&O, and a group of really excited, younger kind of bike tourists, and they were all having a great time, but, they really took over the camp without much care as to what else was going on. And I'm sort of like, well, normally I'd be with them, but like in that instance, I wasn't. So it's like, I do feel like that there's a lot of tricky social norms that go on with shared campsites. And in this instance, when people were clearly asleep, it's just really interesting to see how some people behave and not behave in these types of instances.
Right. Yeah. And I guess maybe part of the trick is like, the woods are big. I wasn't prepared to give up our location, but there's also like when I woke up the next morning, I just like packed my stuff up quietly and went around to where I was hoping that guy would have sat all night and spent my morning there. So kind of trying to get that solitude where you can. Obviously, the peak of a mountain is a prime destination. A lot of people are going to want to be there. So, obviously, if I had anticipated that situation, maybe I would have set up in a different spot. If I'd been awake when he showed up, I would have suggested a different spot for him. But, c'est la vie. It is what the experience was, and still a great trip. I really enjoyed it. It was Aaron's first time doing anything like that, so he also enjoyed it. But you had asked about the downhill, and
of course.
Like I was saying, I think the direction that I had plotted the route, or that I kind of vetted the route, was the wrong way. And so having known that, we ended up going south down to Washougal, Washington, which is also connected by the C-Trans system. We caught a bus back from there. But the downhill was about, 7 miles of mostly downhill gravel. There was a little bit of uphill as well, but, it was very, very doable, and not as bad, I think, with the vibrations and things as I thought it had been. Again, on my recon ride, I'd gone the other direction, and my arms were pretty worn out by all the vibration and bouncing on the gravel. The other way was not so bad. I think it was a gentler descent. So, anyways, I recommend it. And once you get back to pavement, there are several rivers you cross. a bunch of other purifying opportunities for the water. And, if we're doing it this way, we definitely needed some water for the hike and that sort of thing. But once you get back to pavement, there's a beautiful downhill ride down to the Washougal River, and the last descent is like 5 miles of just pure downhill bliss. It's a really long, awesome descent, and I would recommend it to anybody. The last little bit of the trip is on Washougal River Road, which really doesn't have a shoulder, and depending on when you're there, it can be a busy road. But leaving in the morning, we didn't have a problem. It was a Sunday morning, and we were able to get out there without too much problem.
It sounds like this was a huge success in terms of your overall experiment using C-Tran and the fast forward and all of that other kind of stuff. I'm curious, are there any other places that you see in your very experienced eye as a transit nerd, and I say that with all great love in my heart, is there some place else that looks good to you that maybe is, I don't know, tempting you before the rains start, or perhaps even next year?
Yes. So I know that Skamania County also experienced its own small fire. That one is now 100% contained and just about taken out. But they have their own transit system that generally in, I think, the winter months runs only on weekdays and not on holidays. I tried doing a ride that I wanted to do using that system once, but it turned out it was Veterans Day and that bus didn't run. But during the summertime, they have been running this, they call it the WET bus, the West End Transit, and it is a bus that is scheduled. We actually had someone on the Sprocket podcast who works with that system to kind of explain it. But it goes out on weekends. It goes out on a hiker's schedule, so you can take an early bus out and get an afternoon bus back from a hike if you want to. But that drops you off. It goes through Carson, Washington, which is an access point for Forest Road 42. And Forest Road 42 goes up over this large mountain range, and it is it's kind of like the Silver Star route, kind of a pretty low quality gravel and dirt road that I would love to go from one side to the other and use transit to do that. So maybe not an overnight, but at least a big long day ride. But that also sets you up for some great stuff there in Clark County and in Skamania County and up into the Gifford Pinchot National Forest.
Yeah, there's some really intriguing transit-aided adventures that one can do from the Portland area. I mean, I've been pretty experienced with doing stuff going out to the coast, and I think I shared with you maybe a year ago the idea of having some fast forwards all the way pretty far down the coast and doing some return trips by transit. So between the coastal routes that are available with all of the county bus systems that are actually pretty well linked together, and using Portland as a hub, I think that's just a really intriguing potential large-scale loop that you could do, and it's a great resource to have. And the beauty is that we talk of the land of sunshine and bunnies and all that, and all these wonderful resources that are there, but these types of resources exist almost everywhere in North America. There's a bus system almost everywhere, and many, many, many bus systems allow you to throw a bike onto a front rack. So doing this type of adventure where you live is very, very doable. And if you're not in North America and you're in Europe and wherever, using transit to aid your ability to get out of a city or get out of the area that you're in is a really, really doable thing. So I thank you for sharing your experience for this, because it shows what is possible.
I'm glad to share it. If anybody wants to see the route, I can share that link I've got a Strava map and some of the data on kind of what you have to do to get there. But there are a number of things. And like you were saying, public transit is kind of experiencing a resurgence in a lot of places. I think budgets and funding were being cut for a long time. It wasn't being prioritized, but I feel like there are many systems that are even better served now by transit than they used to be.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's a real boon for bike tourists, because I think that if you are not loving where you're at, if you are wanting to kind of get to a different place, if you are behind in your schedule, you can take a look and find ways to use these great public transit systems to really buy yourself. In some instances, you could buy yourself a full day's worth of riding if you're able to go from one side of a metropolitan area to another. It's certainly doable, and it's a great resource to have. It can also be something that can be relatively inexpensive too. Sometimes just a few dollars gets you enough to get from one side of town to another, which is great.
That's right. Just don't be like Mr. Spock in Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, in which he says, "What is exact change?"
Yeah, Nimoy. Very good.
Make sure you got your fare.
Exactly. Make sure, because I guess they don't have cash in the Star Trek universe.
They don't.
I don't even think they pay for anything. They just go up to a screen, say tea, Earl Grey hot, and boom, there you go. Hey, we should take this opportunity to pitch one more time our little holiday meetup that we are thinking of throwing together here. You have a location figured out, and I think it won't surprise anyone.
Yeah, you may be familiar with the Beer Mongers at Southeast Division and 12th down here in Portland, Oregon. It is a fine place to get a brew. There's always sports games with live sound and a big stick hanging from the ceiling that is a majesty to view and behold.
I'm looking forward to seeing the big stick. It is a sight to behold. In fact, I forgot to look for it on one of my trips, and then on a subsequent trip, I actually looked for the big stick, and it is a big stick, and it is suspended with great honor in the middle of the ceiling. So it's worth seeing. So we will have more details as we get closer to that, but it will be just a casual get together where if you're interested in either or both of the pods, we will be there, and we will be imbibing the fine beverages that can only be provided at Southeast Division and 12th.
That's right. And when we say casual, it doesn't mean that you can't wear a tie. You can wear a tie if you want to.
In fact, if you did wear a tie to this, I would be kind of impressed. I do not plan
wear it
on
casually.
Yes, very casually, very casually. So we'll have more details on the goings on for all of that as we get closer to the magical date. Of course, this is going to be celebrating in part the 100th edition of the Pedalshift Project, of which you and Aaron will be guest stars on, and we'll be recording that somewhere in or around there. Whether that's going to be a part of the meetup or not is still to be determined. But at the very least, Southeast Division and 12th, Friday, December 3rd. Mark your calendars. If you are in the Portland area, or you are Portland adjacent, or for some crazy reason you would like to travel to such a thing, Friday, December 3rd.
Maybe you're Portland curious.
You could be Portland curious. That would be very good. And we'll also throw out the invite to other local Portland types of note. Maybe we can get the Kat Caparellos of the world to join us, and some others, and maybe just make this super bikey podcasty.
Yes.
Although I'm inviting her in the first instance right now. She's never heard this from me, and I should probably email her before I make this public. Kat, by the way, if you want to come, we would love to see you. We'd love to have you there. So anyways, well, Brock, thank you so much for joining I think you may be close to the 5-Timers Club on the Pedalshift Project. I just realized right now.
Oh. Great.
We'll have to figure that out, and maybe I'll teach you the secret handshake for this particular podcast, 5-Timers Club, because I think it is you're the only member, if that would be the case.
Okay.
Maybe you can invent it. Maybe you are the vanguard. You are the beginning of it. But thank you so much for joining, and we'll look forward to seeing you soon.
Very good. We'll demonstrate that handshake at the meetup.
Indeed. Once again, a big thank you to Brock for joining the show. As it turns out, Brock Dittus has been a long-time member of the 5-Timers Club. Episodes 2, 4, 31, 32, 44, this sounds like a lager combination, 57, 78, and now 93. He is the sole member of the 5-Timers Club other than yours truly. I've been around for 93 episodes, as you probably have figured out. But Aaron Flores, his co-host of the Sprocket podcast, has been on 4 times, so he is 1 away from getting the handshake. So we know that will certainly be happening for episode number 100. Aaron has been on episodes 004, 044, big on the 4s there, 57 and 78 as well. So, only one member of the 5-Timers Club here on the Pedalshift Project. Guthrie Straw, incidentally, the the co-host to be of the Sprocket podcast, of course, has been a past guest on the show as well. So, thanks again, Brock, for being on the show. Thanks again for being a member of the 5-Timers Club, plus some. And looking forward to maybe initiating a new member, Aaron, in episode number 100. As always, we like to close out the show with a big thank you to all of the supporters through the Pedalshift Society. If you like what you hear, you can help maintain Pedalshift as an independent, listener-supported voice while expanding the offerings. We're talking $5, $2, or even $1 a month helps with the cost of hosting the pod and the website, and you can do it for a bit and cancel anytime. One-shot support is welcome if you're not into the small monthly thing. Check it out and join at pedalshift.net/society. On to the society. Ethan Georgie, Kimberly Wilson, Caleb Jenkinson, Cameron Lane, Andrew McGregor, Michael Hart, Josiah Matthews, Keith Nagel, Brock Dittus, Thomas Skadow, Seth Krieger, Marco Lowe, Terrence Manson, Noah Schroer, Harry Telgadis, John Sikorsky, Richard Killian, Chris Barron, Scott Taylor, Brian Wren, Mark Van Ram, Brad Hipwell, Paul Mulvey, Stuart Buchan, Todd Stutz, Mr. T, Roxy Arning, Nathan Poulton, Harry Hugel, Ferguson Meek, Stephen Dickerson, Vince LaGreco, Ruth Divorcey, Michelle Miller, Matthew Lewis, Michael Baker, Billy Crafton, Paul Culbertson, Scott Culbertson, Matt Perry, Danielle Jepson, Cody Florchinger, Tom Beninati, and new this episode, Bobby Ruppel. And thanks also to all anonymous and past contributors for making this show happen. Thank you for joining. You can find Pedalshift at pedalshift.net for more great bicycle touring content. You can hear the Pedalshift Project through Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. Opening music courtesy of Jason Kent off his self-titled album. The track is called America. Check out his band Sunfield's latest release, Mono Mono, wherever cool music is available.